Hi, you guys. This is James Gorey with the Banana Republican. Today I'm going to talk about, anti-Semitism again. Why? Because it's ramping up. It's rapidly becoming kind of the way of the world, for good or for ill. I think it's for ill, personally. But yeah, is anti-Semitism, especially in the church, that's getting big. And so my approach to this is anti-Semitism, the last temptation of Christianity. I think it might be. Um, Interestingly, anti-Semitism in Christianity isn't new. It's been around for an awful long time. And anti-Semitism outside of Christianity isn't new either. That's been around a long time. In Christianity, go back to Calvin, go back to Luther, um, go back to the Catholic Church in as late as the 1920s, um, in their kind of pronouncement, something Civilta Catholica, where they kind of made an accommodation with the Nazi Party and so forth. So, um, and thereafter. So, European anti-Semitism, European Christian anti-Semitism, has been around a long time. Pogroms, whether it's the Russian Orthodox Church, whether it's the Catholic Church, whatever, throughout Europe, there have been pogroms. There's been the Spanish Inquisition. There are reasons for some of these, not excuses. Um, I'm not excusing them at all, but there are rational reasons for some things, and it doesn't mean rationality is always a good thing, right? Okay. So, for example, in the Inquisition, when the Spanish crown had kicked out the Moors and kicked out the Islamic Caliphate or whatever was the ruling Muslim entity in Spain, that in 1492 they also wanted the Jews out. Well, why did they want the Jews out? Well, because the Jews were heavily involved with the running of that part of the world. The Jews are smart people. You don't use Jews to do the great thing, to use their intellect and their capabilities, then you're poorer for it. I think that's pretty much obvious throughout history, isn't it? Um, so Christopher Columbus, I think he was an Italian Jew. So anyway, I'll go into that later. But as Isabel and I can't remember their guy's name, but they're trying to control Spain. I think there's a big trust problem there. That doesn't excuse it by any stretch, but there's a fragility to a transition that happens all the time. It's just part of political life. I'm not excusing it, but I think I can understand some of the rationale behind it, although I don't condone it whatsoever. So, um, as far as the Catholic Church, or as far as let's take it, this anti-Semitism as something at its essence. Where did that come from? People always ask that, and it's a good question. I would say that I've given that some thought, and my most kind of deepest understanding of it is biblical. It comes from the Bible. And God literally says to the Jewish people at some point, or on several points in different parts of the Bible, he says, look, you've betrayed my goodness, you've betrayed my law, you've left your Jewish, your Hebrew inheritance from God for other gods, Baal, Moloch, Moloch, whatever it might be. You've adopted the gods of other pagan peoples. And so at some point in the Old Testament, I think it's even the Torah, it says you'll be scattered and you'll be a scourge, you'll be hated, you'll be persecuted. That's the gist of it. So God's telling him this is what's going to happen. So if in a very real sense, anti-Semitism, though not good by any stretch of the imagination, God saw it. He told him this is what's going to happen. If you do this, then this is going to happen. You do A, then you get B. If you don't do A, then everything's cool. But things worked out the way they worked out. So it's not about being anti-Jewish whatsoever. It's reading the Jewish texts and taking them at their word, taking them at face value. That doesn't excuse the perpetrator whatsoever. Nazi Germany is primarily among them, right? So anti-Semitism has been around a long time. At the same time, during the Nazi era, there were many Christians who were protecting Jews. whether it's I don't know, the guy from Germany. What's his name? Uh, the guy that Eric and Taxis wrote about. I can't remember his name offhand. But there were Jewish priests, Jewish people. I mean, Christian priests and Christian people who took in Jews, hid them, and saved them, and that's a fact. So, anti-Semitism is not a part of Christianity, but I think it's a temptation among Christians. I think it definitely is. And professing Christians like Candace Owen, like Tucker Carlson, just to name two, those are the two most prominent I'm aware of. To profess that you're a Christian on the one hand, and that but you can't support Israel on the other, is just it's contradictory. You can't do both. Now, let me just nuance that a little bit and say this: um, are there Jews that are bad people? Absolutely. Are there quote unquote Christians that are bad people? Absolutely. Are there atheists that are bad people? Absolutely. Are there Buddhists? Go on down the line, right? Everyone knows that. Okay, so on the one hand, you have to say that. Well, you have to acknowledge that. So a guy like George Soros, I don't know him personally. I just know of him, and he seems to be a very bad guy. I think his bad guyness status goes all the way back to Hungary during the Second World War, where he turned his own people to save his skin. So he's of Jewish extraction. I believe he's an atheist. So he stopped being a Jew, any kind of religious Jew, if he ever was one. All right. So he's done horrible things, apparently, funding all these riots and so forth, doing all kinds of things that are against the U.S. and against democracy and against anti-Christian, against God. So George Soros has defined himself that way. He's a Jew by extraction. Okay. Um, Napoleon wasn't a Jew. Okay, so Corsican, I believe, which is French, Italian, whatever, whoever crossed paths on that island over the centuries. Um, so there's a lot of, and he was a conqueror, and he killed a lot of people and did a lot of nasty things. Stalin wasn't Jewish. Stalin actually was a seminary student at one point, and then traded that in for Marxism. Marx, by the way, was Jewish, right? Um, so you have to look at these things and go, okay, take a clear-eyed look at it. Now, here's the trope that people don't like, the Jewish people don't like specifically, and that is, um, well, the Jews control banking, they control the movie, they control the industry, they control every, they have more, they control the world. Do they control the world? I would say not totally, but I say they have a certain overrepresentation. And I don't mean that in the conspiratorial way. I mean it in the biblical way. What does that mean? Well, way back when, God said, look, I'm going to bless you. Abram, you're going to become Abraham. Sarai, you're going to become Sarah. And the import there is that God put his spirit or his blessing and added a ha to their sound. So Abram became Abraham. Sarai became Sarah. And they weren't perfect. I think Abraham was the son of an idol maker in Chaldea or the land of Ur or someplace in the Middle East somewhere. Um, so Abraham and Sarah, were they perfect? No. Did they have perfect faith? Not at all. I think Sarah laughed at God when they said you were going to have a kid. So, and that lack of belief permeates the Bible, New Testament and Old Testament. Just it's there. Okay, it's there. Whether it's John the Baptist's father saying, my wife is well along in years, we're not going to have a kid. Well, then you're going to be mute until the kid's born. Things like that, right? All kinds of lack of faith demonstrable. It's throughout the Bible. So on the one hand, God blesses the Jews. He says, look, I'm going to use you people. You're not numerous, but I'm going to use you to tell the world about me. Okay? That's through the Torah, through the Tanakh, the Old Testament, and through the New Testament. And he tells David, the Messiah will come through your line. The prophet Nathan does that in, I think, 2 Samuel, among other places perhaps. So the idea that anti-Semitism is a Christian value is not founded in Christianity. But anti-Semitism among the nations of the world is foretold in the Old Testament. And it's the causality is, if you can believe the Old Testament, it's the Jews' disbelief, the Jews' faithlessness, the Jews' bad behavior towards God. Does that, if you don't believe that, that doesn't make me anti-Semitic. That makes me a Bible-believing guy, and I am. So I look for the Bible for explanation, for understanding. But on the flip side, God says, look, way back in Genesis, I will curse those who curse you, and I will bless those who bless you. And Jesus says, vengeance is mine. The Lord says, vengeance is mine. But it also says in the Bible, hey, God's going to use certain peoples to punish other peoples, namely Israelis or Jews, right? We're going to use the Assyrians to come down and beat up on Israel and the house of Judah, and the Babylonians, and so on. You get the idea, the Romans. And so other peoples are used to punish Israel and to punish other nations as well. And then those nations in turn are usually destroyed at some point. So it's I didn't make this up. This is what's in the Bible. Here's the thing. It happens to have happened that way. What are you going to do? So I think the Jews are blessed people. And, with the diaspora of the Jews, synagogues were all over the place, right? All over the place. Asia, Europe, North Africa, Far East, South America, North America. And God said, you're going to spread my word of the God of Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac. You're going to spread those words, Isaac and Jacob. Anyway, you're going to spread the word. So that the diaspora of the Jews, in a sense, brought the word of God to a lot of the world. And here's an interesting thing, a little off topic, but still relatable. I find it fascinating that in a time when Christians, and the U.S. Christian Church per se, and probably the Catholic Church from the Vatican, are condemning Israel and using the conflict in Gaza and now the conflict in Iran as well as a means and as justification for anti-Semitism. At the same time, the awakening of the Jewish people, some Jewish people, I would say, is happening as well towards Christianity. People like Jeff Morgan from, I think it's Highway 53 or So Be It. Maybe it's both of those. There's a podcast called One for Israel, all Jewish people. There's another podcast, Jonathan Kahn. He's a Messianic rabbi. Another one is Jason Sobel, Messianic rabbi. Rabbi Schneider, I don't know his first name. So there's a lot of, Amir Sephardi, I think he lives in the Valley of Armageddon. He lives right got a front row seat, right? These are Jewish people who have come to Christ in various ways. The important part, that's important, but the point is they're putting it out there in podcasts, and they're getting millions and millions of views in Israel. They're putting it out in Hebrew a lot of times. So this is happening. So on the one hand, on the flip side, a lot of anti-Semitism on Christians is growing, unfortunately. And it's the last temptation of Christians, by the way. And on the flip side, Jews are becoming messianic, are seeing Christ, are seeing Jesus in the book of Isaiah, in the book of Deuteronomy, in all these, in Micah, born in Bethlehem, right? In Jeremiah 31, what was the son's name, and what's his name, and a variety of different Old Testament references. And Daniel, hey, the Messiah will be cut off, will be born and cut off before the second temple is destroyed. Well, that kind of limits your choices, doesn't it? So these Jewish people are seeing Christ, and I think it's a precursor, I know it is, to a much larger expansion of an awareness. Now, that doesn't make me an anti-Semite, or does it make me think, oh, you're only a good Jew if you're coming to Christ? No, you're just like anybody else. You're lost if you don't come to Christ. In fact, Jesus said, I've come for the lost sheep of Israel. Not for the Bulgarians, right? Not for the Vikings, but for the lost sheep of Israel. So To be anti-Semitic is to be really anti-God at some level, because you're violating what God has said. You're violating God's precepts, and says, look, don't do this. And even Paul says, don't do this. Don't condemn and boast. The Jews are, you're better than Jews because you have faith and they don't. Um, that's just, he says, look, the Jews sustain us, not the other way around. So, all right. So everything out of the Bible came from the Jews. And by the way, without the Jews, there's no Islam either. There's no Christianity. There's no Islam, and there's no Messiah. So I'm going to leave it there. But for all you folks who are thinking, let's condemn Israel, the state of Israel, let's condemn the IDF, let's condemn Bibi Netanyahu, let's condemn the Jewish people, let's do the whole river to the sea chant, and feel better about ourselves and feel better about helping the people of Gaza. The people of Gaza do need help, but they don't need the kind of help that Hamas is giving them or had given them. They need much more help than what much different and much more spiritual help than being raised on hating Jews. And that goes for Christians as well. So the idea of anti-Semitism being the last temptation of Christians, I think it is. I think it's an indication of where we are in the world. And I think we need to speak out against it and stand with the Jewish people, stand with Israel, because God certainly is. And I don't want to be against God. That's your decision as well, but that's mine. So this is James Gorey. If you like this kind of material, whether you agree with it, disagree with it, send me horrible comments if you like, that's fine. Or agree and send great comments. That'd be good too. Subscribe, comment, and share at the Banana Republican. Hey, thanks. See you next time.